And this leads us to the final topic of this section, market mythology. So far we've talked about the structural mechanics of the system a little bit, pointing out the inherent contradictions and problems. As of now, through the overpowering growth in science and technology, the monetary system can be considered structurally obsolete, serving only as a paralyzing hindrance of social progress. Not to mention a destroyer of trust, human trust in the environment. That's a whole different topic in and of itself. Unfortunately, the social indoctrination within the market system has created a mentality which blindly supports the social dogma regardless of what we have touched upon. The identity relationships are simply too strong. In many ways, it's like a religion. Taking away the belief in the market system is like taking away someone's belief in God, for it challenges who they are. When you're a little kid, you pull on your mother's pants and you want candy, and she might say, no, we can't afford that. So you have this instant indoctrination to the monetary system from the earliest form of life, because obviously your parents are always struggling to a certain degree, so it becomes absolutely built into your psychology. Not to mention that those that have successfully acquired a great deal of wealth, you'll find that those that are in fact very wealthy, they will almost always be inclined to tell you that the system's great. That's just the nature of behavioral reinforcement. Now, the three most dominant of these psychological indoctrinations that I want to talk about are the notions of property, incentive, and associations with freedom of choice. Starting with property. The capitalist economy is founded on the very idea of exchanging property in the markets. Even your labor is a form of property in a sense. The world that we know is so bound up in the process of buying and selling that most just can't imagine any other way of functioning human affairs. Property is often associated with so-called rights as well. We use a legal system to protect our property, and if anyone interferes with what is mine, their freedom can possibly be taken away. In fact, there is even an entire industry which is there to tell you what the best property there is to own. It's called advertising, of course. Yet, with all of this obsession over property, very few ask the question, why do we have property to begin with? The answer is simple. It's scarcity. Property is an outgrowth of scarcity. The farther we go back in time, the more difficult and time-consuming it was for people to create tools or extract a resource. They, in turn, protected it because it had immense value relative to the labor entailed along with the possible scarcity associated. People claim ownership because it is a legal form of protection. Property is not an American or free enterprise or capitalist idea. It is an ancient mental perspective necessitated from generations of scarcity. If there isn't scarcity, the rationale for property becomes an irrelevant issue. Now let's move on to the idea of incentive. As the theory goes, the need for a profit provides a person or organization with a motivation to work on new ideas and products that would sell in the marketplace. In other words, the assumption is that if technology replaced humans in the workforce and abundance could be created, then people would just have no motivation to do anything socially relevant. No monetary incentive, no progress is the idea. There are two glaring issues with this assumption. The first is that it is entirely based on projected values, and values are almost entirely based on culture. Nikola Tesla, Louis Pasteur, Charles Darwin, and the Wright brothers, Albert Einstein, and Isaac Newton did not make their massive contributions to society because of material self-interest. Did Martin Luther King walk down the street in Birmingham, Alabama, while a bunch of racists threw rocks at his head because he was on his way to cash a check? If the incentive motivation theory held true, then you would see no volunteerism in the world today. Amazingly, in a 1992 U.S. Gallup poll, it was found that more than 50% of American adults volunteered time with no pay for social causes at an average of 4.2 hours a week for a total of 20.5 billion hours a year. This is pretty amazing, especially with the lack of social capital in a place like the United States, which is the most powerful free market country there is. The ideology is the most ingrained, so I find that to be pretty incredible. The sickness of self-interest generated by the monetary system, even with this sickness, humans still strive to help each other and give to society without reward. What's even more amazing is that the poor and the middle class are more likely to volunteer than the wealthy. And think about that, these are the people that have the least amount of money. So it makes you understand the cultural and psychological nuances that are created. The more money you get, the more diseased you might possibly become. It's a fascinating phenomenon. The second thing to consider is that while it is true that useful inventions and methods do come from the motivation for personal gain, the intent behind those creations has nothing to do with human or social concern. For the incentive goal is not to improve humanity, but to make money. There is a massive disconnect. And as we have denoted thoroughly, the very means by which money is obtained in our system is counter to social progress fundamentally, for it is based on the deliberate withholding of efficiency. And by the way, I haven't even addressed the traditional corruption that we see occurring on a daily basis, based and derived from this incentive for income, which spreads like a malignant cancer of indifferent self-interest, from product dishonesty, murder, fraud, theft, slave labor, outsourcing, price fixing, monopolistic collusion, redundant waste, environmental exploitation, illegal taxation, institutional theft, societal indifference, imposed psychological distortions, or advertising, and of course, the sickest monetary incentive ever created, war. That is the reality of the monetary incentive. And the final myth for now, the freedom of choice. The free market is very persuasive for most people because it appears that the possibilities are endless and that they, the individual, have limitless choices. People witness the vast stratification of goods and services portrayed by the media and advertising and think that since the options just exist in abstraction, it has some form of relevance to the freedom of the individual. They can walk into a store and choose between 25 kinds of detergent and 75 kinds of sugar-coated cereal, yet they turn a blind eye with the fact that their lives are managed by, on average, 2 political parties. They pay no attention to the reality that 40% of the world's wealth is owned by 1% of the population, and thus 99% of the world's people will never obtain the luxuries afforded by the 1%. More specifically, everyone seems oblivious to the reality that nearly every day of your life, you are forced by the obligation of mere survival and, of course, debt which is imposed into a private dictatorship where most of your decisions are controlled by those in the next artificially created hierarchical degree, the next larger hierarchical degree. It's amazing to me when you talk to economists and they say, well, people have a choice of where they work. They only have a choice of where they work within a specific frame that is allowable based on their demographic of education, if you will. And of course, there's so many friend orientations in business. The ultimate fantasy is that anyone can be president in the United States. This is something that's been perpetuated. Like these are groups that perpetuate themselves elitism. And elitism works in the same way in the corporate world. You are absolutely restricted. You have no freedom because you're forced to do the work as it is. And it's amazing to me, and I get this argument a lot from high-end economists. They say that you have freedom of choice. You can choose where you work. No, you really can't. When you get out of college, there's this wall of jobs, and you can find your slot, and that's about it. That's your choice. It's a preset choice. So I ask you, what freedoms are we talking about? You're only as free as your purchasing power will allow you to be. And the statistics have proven that the socioeconomic rank you are born into tends to persist for the rest of your life. If you are born poor, you will likely remain poor. Why? Because all the odds are against you. If you are rich, you will likely remain rich. Why? Because all the odds are in favor. It is the nature of the system. For example, if you have $1 million and put it into a CD at 5% interest, you're going to generate $50,000 a year simply for that deposit. You are making money off money itself. Paper being made on top of paper, nothing more. No invention, no contribution to society, no nothing. That being denoted, if you are lower to middle class, who is limited in funds, and must get interest-based loans to buy your home or use credit cards, then you are paying interest into the bank, which the bank is then using, in theory, to pay the person's return with the 5% CD.